Hereby call this open part of the GPNA session to order. I'd like to ask everyone to please rise for a moment of silence. I just want to make a note as we rise there to reflect on the passing of former Mayor Howard Hall, who served the community as a mayor and as a councillor for over a decade, and that our thoughts and prayers are with the family and our condolences. Please be seated. So I will come back again on visitation for Howard Hall, but we'll come to that at the announcements in the next couple bullet points here. So first we're going to deal with the matters of closed session. There was two declared pecuniary interest from Councillor Watton and Councillor Somerville for closed sessions. They did not participate in the discussion, and they left the room for the meeting. And we have matters from that closed session was the appointment of members for the Broadband Internet Advisory Committee appointments. This is from the conversion of the MSC board over to advisory committee. I need a mover and a seconder for that. Please, moved by Councillor Drew, seconded by Councillor Kett. Any questions on that? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. Next item is the disclosure of pecuniary interest for open session. Seeing none, announcements from council and staff. Councillor Drew, did you have the details for Howard Hall's?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Visitation for former Mayor Howard Hall is at the Port Perry United Church today between 2 and 4 and 7 to 9, and the funeral is tomorrow at 11 o'clock at the Port Perry United Church. In lieu of flowers, donations to the Port Perry United Church or the Port Perry Hospital Foundation would be very well received. Thank you.
And just the flags are flying at half-mast for recognition of the mayor's passing. Councillor Watton, announcements?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a few. First off, I'd like to announce that the Chamber of Commerce is holding their Awards of Excellence evening on March 21st from 7 to 9 at the Skewgaw Community Recreation Center. Cost is $45 for non-chamber and $40 for chamber members. Also, the Chamber is hosting a Home and Garden Show April 14 and 15, again at the Skewgaw Community Center. And thirdly, I'd just like to announce that the Rotary Gala is scheduled for the 21st of April at the Royal Ashburn. Thank you.
Thank you. Other announcements from Council? Councillor Somerville?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, we have the G-Moms are having their gala on April the 14th. And the tickets are now going on sale for that, and it starts at 10 o'clock in the morning. It's a luncheon, and it's fabulous for us girls, well, guys too. And there's a fashion show. And also, another delightful announcement is the hospice is having a walk for hospice on May the 6th. And so please mark your calendar for that. It will be at the fairground, and they're hoping to raise a good amount of money in that. Thank you.
Other announcements from council? Announcements from staff? Ms. Coleman?
Thank you, Mayor Rowett. We have a few announcements from our Recreation and Culture group. There's going to be a special exhibit at the Heritage Center called Egypt, Gift of the Nile, and it opens on March 7th and runs through till May 18th. Also, museum staff will be doing some programming at the Purple Woods Conservation Area on March 11th and April 18th. And the last one is just our recreation program registration is now open for the spring session. So if you want to sign up for programs, this is the time.
Okay, and one big announcement is on this past Friday, we were part of photo opportunity in front of the Seagrave Bridge, receiving just under $1 million from the province under the OSIF top-up funding, and MPP Granville Anderson and his executive assistant Justin McLean were in attendance, and some media was there, and most of staff were there. Most of council were there, and it's a great success story. We're very lucky to be a benefactor to those large funds, because the Seagrave Bridge, as we know, would have been very difficult to move forward without the funding as we had laid out in the capital budget. So very much appreciative of the provincial government and our MPP representing us, because Granville Anderson listened to me and us constantly chirping in his ear that we we're in dire need for this funding for emergency reasons, and $1 million to us is a significant. It's practically 10% of our levy. So it's very thankful for the province to come through on this, and we want to make sure that recognition goes out to all those who are involved in the staff and in the application process, and the council for lobbying Granville for it, and Granville fighting for us at Queen's Park. So thanks again to all those involved, and we're looking forward to a rollout of this. Councillor Coleman, if you just wanted to say, is it the fall, the expected time for this rehabilitation, refurbishment?
Yes, Mayor. We have a report going forward with this agenda to award the design of the work, and we expect the construction will start this fall.
Sorry, I meant Director Coleman. I didn't mean to demote you in that capacity. So, yes, and as we will be talking about more of the details, if it is a pulled item on the consent agenda, when we get to that part, we'll see if it does get pulled for more details. But anyways, thanks again for that. Any other final announcements from staff? See none. Okay, we'll move on to we don't have any presentations or delegations, and we are then on to the consent agenda. So I have a consent agenda with some items pre-selected on there. 9.2.1 has been pulled by Councillor Somerville, which is the flag-raising half-mast proclamations policy. 9.2.3 is pulled by Councillor Guido, which is the Port Perry Farmers Market. 9.2.5 is the dehumidifier contract, pulled by Councillor Drew. 9.2.6, which is the Scuog Youth Centre and relocation of the museum, pulled by Councillor Back and Councillor Drew. 9.2.7 is the steel building at Scuog Shores Museum, pulled by Councillor Somerville. 9.3.2 is the Town of Essex purchase of closed school buildings correspondence, pulled by Councillor Watton. 9.3.4 is the Town of Whitby correspondence regarding the provincial library funding, pulled by Councillor Back and Councillor Somerville. 9.3.6, which is the City of Oshawa correspondence regarding the comments cannabis consumption, Councillor Somerville. Any other items that need to be pulled, Councillor Watt? 9.3.5, which is the accessibility concerns. Any other items? All right, so seeing that the detailed Seagrave and Scuog Line 8 bridge detail was not pulled, we've already talked about it, but Ms. Coleman, is there anything that you wanted to speak of or say or have this pulled to highlight? Because I would pull it for that reason if you...
No, just to reiterate what you said, that we are very grateful for this funding contribution from the province so that we can reopen this bridge as soon as we can.
Great. Thank you very much. So I have Councillor Watton has moved the council agenda, or the consent agenda, seconded by Councillor Guido, save and accept the items that have been listed. So final call for any items that have been identified to be pulled. Seeing no further polls, then the items listed under Section 9 consent agenda be approved, save and accept the items that have already been listed. All those in favor? Carried. Next, the first item is Councillor Somerville with item 9.2.1.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick correction, I think on page one of one, which is attachment number 2, and about the flags half-mast. I think this is a wonderful idea, first of all, but it said shall only be flown at half-mast on the death of. I think it should be on the date of the death of, not on the death of. That could be any time. That could be right up to funeral time. I
What was
just
the
would like
page
to have...
number exactly that you were referring to?
I'm sorry, at number 2, policy. Go to attach, well, let me see, what page is that? Page 14, I think it is. So, it's attachment 2. Under policy, number 2 policy. Do you see that? Flags are flown at half-mast. And it goes down, the flags flown at the township property shall only be flown at half-mast on the death of, up to and including the date of the funeral. I think it should be from the date of death, because it can be any time. It can be right up to the date of, right up to the funeral. So as soon as we hear it needs to go half-mast.
So you're just interpreting that line differently?
I just would like to see date put in there.
The flags flown at township property shall only be flown at half-mast on the death of, up to and including the day of the funeral for the following. Yeah, so, Councillor,
Kat?
no, I was actually looking to, Ms. Fitton to just comment on that, if you felt some clarity in there, or is there a way that it was being interpreted was the way that it was intended?
Thank you. Through the mayor, we can add date to that. We can rephrase it.
Okay. Councillor Cat?
Thank you, Mayor. I believe it's just in the wording, because when I read it, it says on the death of, and then they listed all the names of who would be flown by. So I think if tidying up the wording would probably be just what it needs.
All right, any other comments? Councillor Back?
Thank you, through the mayor. May I suggest on the announcement of, like, once township officials are notified, or notification of, because you may not know, a person may pass on a Monday and the family doesn't notify until a Wednesday, and you wouldn't want that other people are offended because it's not the date. It's when township staff are made aware of.
Yeah, I see you're saying if the family is not wanting it to be publicly announced and it's just gone through social media or something like that, you might want it to be the
Right, and you wouldn't want to have certain people complaining to the township because it's not immediate if township officials have not been notified. So once notification to township staff, or whatever, to tidy it up, but I mean the specific date of death, people may not know that, or a weekend.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and those are good comments, and I think, and is why it's worded this way. So it just allows that flexibility. You're quite correct, Councilor Bright. We may not hear of the death for some time, and waiting for an announcement. Even we may not have an announcement, but become aware of it in some way. You know, what is an announcement? I think the existing wording provides the flexibility that once we're aware, then action would be taken.
Any other questions from council? I have it moved by Councillor Drew that that the policies be adopted. I need a seconder for that. Councillor Guido, any final comments or questions on it? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. Next item, Councillor Guido, 9.2.3, the farmers market.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, you moving the report?
Yes.
Councillor Guido, I need a seconder for that. Councillor Watton? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Two questions on this. An overall question, I thought through previous years' discussions, the location of the farmers market was going to be relocated from its existing Joe Fowler parking lot to perhaps surrounding the old mill. And I know last year, we were advised that they had already started their advertising so that they couldn't change locations, but that they would look to change locations for the 2018 season. So that's my first question, and maybe I'll just leave it with that, and perhaps Director Coleman is aware of the decision to keep where it is.
Director Coleman, do you have any insight?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I have not personally been involved in the discussions about the location of it, so I don't know exactly what's transpired. I could find out and get back to you.
Well, I'm sure it goes to the concern from the farmers market that the location we were proposing for them to move to would be surrounding the old mill, and that the ground wasn't necessarily flat there, that there's an incline in the road. But I just recall from previous years' discussion that it was going to be next year, meaning now this year, that it would be discussed, the departure of them from the parking lot. And my other question is on page 25, under the agreement, or parameters of the agreement, number 6 says, "The Township of Scugog shall provide a council and staff liaison to the Farmer Market Committee." To the best of my understanding, I'm not sure if anyone from council has been appointed to be on that committee or that liaison, and if this is part of the agreement, perhaps we need to appoint someone to be on that alongside with staff. And I'm not sure if that would be Ms. Cornish, who is the staff liaison.
Director Coleman, did you? Mr. Allure, the CAO, just also had something to add to the last question too, so he might have information on this question as well.
25.
I may be able to help in this regard. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Guido is quite correct that there were discussions, I do recall last year, concerning the farmers market moving over to the old mill. Discussions that I had with representatives of the farmers market were they were hoping for, yes, a flat area like the a public square or plaza space that they could move to, and we're not really that receptive to locating on the sloped laneway that enters at the foot of Queen Street. So I think when we get to the point where there's a proper space for them to relocate, they'll probably gladly do that. This was my impression. Then with respect to Councillor Guido's questions in terms of staff and council representative, my understanding, don't recall it ever being something that council has endorsed or whether council's even identified a council member. But I did ask Ms. Cornish about who the council representative was in her mind, and she thought it had been Councillor Kett over the last couple of years. But if council would like to duly identify the councillor, then of course that would be the right thing to do in my mind. Thank you.
Did that answer your questions? Any other questions or comments on this? Okay. All right, so
Leave it as understood as Councillor Kett.
yeah, we'll just leave it as understood. Then, so we have the motion as recommended. Like I said, final, any any amendments or stays as is? Okay. All right, that being said, all those in favor? Carried. Next item is the 9.2.5, pulled by Councillor Drew. We got a move by Councillor Drew. We need a seconder for that. Councillor Somerville. Councillor Drew?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I certainly support this, but I just had a question about, on page 34, what would be the anticipated revenue from the additional time that the arena would be open? Sorry, I didn't give you a heads up on that, but let's put it this way. Instead of giving a dollar figure, how long do you think it would take to make up the cost of the humidifier with the extra time that the arena would be open?
Give you a quick.
4 and 4, 8, carry the 2. Divide by 6, yeah.
Through the mayor to the councilor, it would take 2 years.
Perfect, thank you very much. Good news.
Any other questions on this item? I do know that it was an ask from previous years about the extension, as it was reported in there. One of the questions that I had here was just after the pilot, or after this season, is there a chance that it could be extended even further or open earlier if will this dehumidifier allow for that with the warmer weather?
To the mayor, it is possible this year, as we know, will be a test year to see how it acts. The one issue we do have is how much the user groups do want the ice time. If we extend, right now, they've booked till the end of May. That's right through till the end of tryouts. After that, we haven't had much demand. Going past May, we do need a time for maintenance on the pad, but then we also get into the day camp time. So once July and August hit, then there's day camps. We have had requests for it to go a bit earlier, but again, that impacts the day camps and our ability to provide that programming. But that being said, if we can find a solution for that, we are open to that moving forward in the future. It's just, there's a gap when you get to August and before the hockey league start up in mid-September. There is a couple-week gap where they haven't committed to using the ice at that point. So if we do see that commitment, then we're obviously open to looking at it. So this is sort of a test year to see how it goes.
Good. Any other questions from council? All right, so it's been moved as recommended, so all those in favor? Carried. Great. Next up is the item 9.2.6, which was pulled by Councillor Back and Councillor Drew. Councillor Drew has moved it, so Councillor Back, are you going to second it? And Councillor Drew?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, you calling on me?
Actually, I've got here the first person pulling it, Councillor Back, so I
Okay.
should go to Councillor Back.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a question for Mr. Belfry. So it says on page 39, right at the end, setting an opening date, September 2018 till the school break in June. May I ask why it wouldn't be open during the summer break? Because that's the time when teens have a lot of time on their hands and not much to do, and times where trouble could be had.
Through the mayor and the councillor, those hours are based on other youth centers that we've toured in the region. If there is that demand, then we'd be open to looking at that. So we're trying to right now set up a meeting with the high school to get in and talk to the kids in the school and get their input on what they would like to see. So we're saying that if we do hear that, that's obviously something we can definitely look at.
Okay, because it would be good, even if it's just a drop-in hangout sort of center to, you know. 'Cause
Right, yeah.
I know Uxbridge had a lot of problems last summer,
Okay.
and nice to have some, keep them busy.
For sure.
Councillor Drew?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On page 38, I see that you've reached out to a lot of existing youth centers to get some ideas. And there are 2 youth centers in Scugog. One of them is at the Victory Church, and now that seems to be more for younger kids, but they did open it as a youth center with like a gymnasium a number of years ago. And also, the community church on Reach has a youth center. So I'm wondering if there's been any discussions, or could there be some discussions with these 2 youth centers to see what worked, what didn't, why it wasn't successful, what is successful with it? Because we certainly don't want, if they're still operating, we certainly don't want to duplicate if there's no need to. So that's just a comment.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Councillor Watt?
And thank you, Mr. Mayor. Further to Councillor Drew's comments, did you meet with Young Life, the group Young Life, for any feedback? And for programming or anything. That program or group has grown quite substantially, and I think they would have a lot of positive feedback for, a few years ago when we had the youth advisory committee, they came and advocated for a youth center already back then, so if you haven't, I would suggest maybe contacting them and just for feedback and tell them the good news and so on.
Through the mayor, Councilor, yes, we have met with representatives of them, and they are wanting to get involved at some level. To date, right now, we don't know how much they want to be involved, but we have had those meetings. We've been actually talking to them for a year now, I think it would be, so.
Other questions or comments, Councillor Somerville?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick question to Mr. Belfry. Your staffing for the youth center, how many staffing have you got? Was that in the budget, the operating budget?
Through the mayor and the councillor, staffing levels haven't been determined yet. Right now, we're talking with CUPE on that. We have some staffing issues that we have to get through and seeing what levels of staffing we can have in there. So we'll be bringing back a report at a future date on our staffing needs for there.
Would that be one person or two people per shift that it would be open for?
At this point, that we don't know. As I said, we're in discussions with CUPE on that, and we don't know the levels. It also depends on the programmings that were offered and the drop-in schedule and those kind of things. So.
Okay, that's great, thank you. And that'll be coming back in the spring?
I was expecting the next month or month and a half.
Okay, fabulous, thank you.
Councillor Guido?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Belfry. What age group are we targeting here? I see mention to high school students, so are we looking to hit the grade 9 to 12 age group only?
It'll be around ages 11 to 15 in that age group, fluctuating in a year or two on either side, but that's the main core.
Okay, so then will your Kryptonite Club still be running for the younger kids?
Yeah, that'll stay downstairs.
Okay,
yeah.
Perfect, thank you.
Any other questions from council? I do have a couple quick ones here to Mr. Belfry. You have listed there some items or wish list, staff looking into various types of equipment on page 39. As I mentioned before, and I still think that's the plan, you're going to go out, connect with RBC, who has the youth initiative, and other local businesses and corporations to sponsor, because the more money that we can obviously come in from the outside, then the more money we'd have to stretch the dollar. So that's good. And are there plans for that, or when is that ask to the community coming out so we can help get that message out?
The ask to the community will probably come out in probably the next month or so. We were sort of getting through today in the initial stages of awards of contracts and things like that, and seeing where we're at with those, and then, but the rec staff are prepared to start rolling that out pretty much in the next week or two, so.
Okay, because I obviously like to make sure that there's opportunity, or we get the information even to some major organizations to push that out through their email lists, et cetera, to the business communities, whether it's the Chamber or BIA, et cetera, as to easy points of contact to get that out for those that want to help contribute. I do see that this is a pilot, so as you've already talked about there, that there will be flexibility for the hours based on the demand and QP, et cetera, all these moving parts to it. But the opening from Thursday to Saturday is just to get this off the ground, and then the plan is that if there's uptake for it, then it'll expand out, either hours or seasons, et cetera, right? And then you also talked about the contact with various groups and all that, and I know that I was part of a meeting with the Lake Scugog Historical Society. I know Mr. Argulis is away for a few days, or several days right now. I just wondered, is there an anticipated follow-up with the Lake Scugog Historical Society? I know because of the records movement and all that, and
the Mayor, at the last Heritage and Museum Advisory Committee, the Historical Society did have a representative there, so I provided an update at that meeting on where we're at with everything, so just to keep them in the loop.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that we, because of their involvement in the past with the records, that we made whatever extra efforts we had to make sure they're in the loop, so maybe reach out to Mr. Arculus with an email or something, just to find out if there's anything that he needs updating on. I would appreciate that, just to help help keep a tight, an enhanced communication. But I just wanted to say that this was a huge ask for the community back, you know, that as long as I can remember, and I'm just very thankful for council supporting it, and also for the staff and making this work. So I'm really looking forward to this, and I hope it really is a great success, and I want to thank all those people involved. And I know there's a shuffle, there's a move, it's a lot of moving parts, but I do believe it is resolving an ask that the community had. So thank you for all the effort that's gone into it. Councillor Drew, you had...
Thank you for recognizing me again. I just happened to think when I was looking on page 39 of the equipment furnishings, the library has a youth group, and they also have like a section of the library devoted to youth. They have a lot of these things, and perhaps you could reach out to them too, to their youth group, to find out what their needs might be in a youth center and what equipment is available there, so that there's no duplication. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions on this? Okay, seeing none, we had it already moved by Councillor Drew, second by Councillor Back. All those in favor? Carried. Next item on the consent, item pulled from the consent agenda was the item 9.2.7, the steel buildings. Councillor Somerville. I need mover, Councillor Somerville, and seconder for that, Councillor Watton. Councillor Somerville.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question to Mr. Belfry. This is really an extremely high index. Construction was $358,000, and you accepted the $119,000 for the tender. And I'm wondering, what was index construction? What did they have? Like, that's 3 times more than what the what you had actually accepted. What did they have to offer? They're going to get body rubs?
Through the mayor, the councillor, the tender was set up on specifications, so whatever price point they wanted to come in at.
But what did they have to give? I mean, that's pretty high. You obviously went through it.
They obviously they went through it. It was the same specifications for everybody. Why their bid was so high, we didn't investigate because it was so high. Sometimes bidders put in, if they don't really want the job, they'll throw that in at a high point, which could have been that. So that's the way they go sometimes, and if they're not really interested in the job, they'll just throw in a high bid and just to see any feedback.
So the ICIR construction, theirs is just as good as what the MJK construction is it?
Yeah, as I said, the tender was specified, so you had to follow the exact specifications. Everybody had to bid on the same thing, so there is no difference in materials or anything like that. It's the exact same.
Okay, that's good to know. I know that 358 just kind of hit me hard, and I'm going, wow, that's a lot of money. Okay, thanks.
It is nice to see that many people taking, like, not only taking the bids, but actually submitting the bids, because then we ensure we have competitive bidding process. I did see the township's bid through bids and tenders, which I believe is operated by eSolutions, and a lot more municipalities are using that, and some other tender platforms. So it's great to see more people bidding on them. So that's what we want to see, because it would be nothing worse than having only a couple bids and one of them was a $358,000 or something. Then would be caught. So other questions from the council on this particular item? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. Next item is Councillor Watton pulled 9.3.2, the correspondence from Town of Essex. Let me just see who we have for correspondence. Moved by Councillor Watton for this particular item. You're moving it, if you're pulling it, and I need a seconder for it. Councillor Somerville. Councillor Watton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just had it pulled, so in the hopes that we would receive and endorse it, and then also reiterate the request to AMO that when the school boards make decisions, that they offer the building to local municipalities at as this says, at $1. municipalities, I agree, have already paid usually for the schools, and to ask then a market price dollar from, again, the municipality to buy it back, to me, has never sat well with me, and so I would just like to have this reiterated to AMO and those that it has been sent to already.
All right,
I just say endorse them.
Okay, so your motion, so just so I'm clear.
I'm just asking that we endorse this letter from Essex.
So, okay, so before we move any further on the discussion here, it was as to receive the movement, but you'd like to receive and endorse?
And endorse.
So, Councillor Somerville, are you okay with that change, just so that we're talking about the same motion here? Councillor Kett?
Mayor, I was just going to support that. I think that's a good idea.
All right. Any other questions, comments from council? So it's to move to receive and endorse the correspondence from Town of Essex regarding the surplus lands from Second Wards. Mr. Clerk, is there any extra direction or clarification you need on that?
Truly noted.
All right. Councilor
That includes sending our request, reiterating the request to AMO.
To AMO, yeah. Noted. All right. Okay, all those in favor? Carried. Next item of correspondence that was pulled was 9.3.4, pulled by Councillor Back and seconded by Councillor Somerville. Councillor Back?
And thank you, through the mayor. So, similar to Councillor Watton's, she did just now, to endorse, but also, is there a way that the township can also do one of their own with regards to a similar motion to go to the province? You know, it's amazing that the province has had a 20-year freeze with regards to libraries, and I know a lot of people think libraries are decreasing in visits, but their need as a cultural hub and with regards to social media and computers as well, where they may not be physically taking out a book, but they would be using the services with regards to e-readers. Our library being a much smaller municipality, this affects our library even more. And so the onus then goes on to the taxpayers to pay for any increased services that the library needs. So I would like to see that we endorse this, but also that we, as the township, also have our voice to the province as well as our own, not just endorsing, because this is actually very important that they start recognizing libraries as cultural hubs and the importance of them, and not to freeze the funding, but to increase.
I just wanted to ask the clerk something on that. The report was, the correspondence was from the clerk of Whitby, who we know was a former clerk here, and this was saying about this being resolved and passed at their council, but I do notice that any contact or the report might have been done from the Whitby Library, the CEO or the acting CEO. So I just don't know if we should have our librarian comment on that before endorsing it. I just don't know if there's something additional that maybe wanted to be put in with it. So, Mr. Clerk, if there's any thoughts or comments on that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through the council, I think that's a good idea. I think that you will see that there are, like you said, comments that come from the Whitby librarians, so it makes sense that we would contact our CEO of the library, Ms. Coughlin, and have her submit her comments as well. We certainly can receive and endorse this one and notify the relevant corporations, organizations within the Whitby resolution, but it makes sense that our librarian commented on it too.
So process-wise, if we were to receive and endorse this, but also send it for additional comment, how would that go? Would we wait to receive comments from our librarian before sending the endorsement?
Well, council can receive and endorse this one right now, and I would suggest that you receive and endorse, and that this motion be sent to the library, CEO of library in Township of Scugog for her comment as well.
Councillor Somerville.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was speaking with the CAO of the library this morning, And she's actually bringing this up at the board meeting at this next month, or this month, I guess it is in March, because we have not received anything, she said, for 10 years, an increase in provincial funding for 10 years. And the amount of money that we get is $59,000, and it's been like that, like I said, for 10 years. So I would like to see that endorsed, and then I would also like for Amy to continue on and maybe send something into the province about increasing this amount of money too.
Yeah, because especially since pending a provincial election too, we wouldn't want an endorsement to wait and then it get lost in the transfer or switch or the election process. So,
thank you.
Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through the council. Knowing that information, then that would satisfy Councillor Back's request, is have it come through the library board, and when those minutes come forward to council, then if they're approved here, then they would be sent off. So that could be done through the library board, so that makes sense.
So we're still going to receive and endorse, if that's what you want to change the motion to. Councillor Back?
Through the mayor, are our library board minutes now coming through council? Because they haven't the previous years. So have we, with the committee restructuring, are they coming back now? I'm on the library board, but I know in past years our minutes didn't come to council.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm getting the nod from my recording secretary that yes, the minutes do come through to council.
Okay, so before we move any further, Councillor Back, you moved it, so you're amending it to the, to receive and endorse. And Councillor Somerville, seconder. Okay, so we're dealing with Councillor Kett.
It just seems to me that we're spinning the wheels backwards if we're doing it that way. Wouldn't it be a little more advantageous to send it to the library board to get approved in comments and then endorse it?
I think that's what our conversation was just about there, was receiving and endorsing it, because Councillor Somerville already had a conversation with our librarian, and then in agreement with it, so we don't hold that endorsement goes off, and then there's still an opportunity for the commenting. It's still going to come back to here, and we can send it, so it'll be a second.
I understand that, but I still see us endorsing something that it's moot to have comments on.
That was what the original reason why I brought that up, but having the extra information here, then I support the endorsement. So, any other councillors' comments? All right, to receive and endorse, all those in favor? Carried. Next item pulled was Councillor Watton with 9.3.5, City of Oshawa, Accessibility Durham Transit. So, Councillor Watton, are you moving to receive it, or are you doing anything else with it? To receive it and refer is the motion to the Accessibility Advisory Committee. Seconder for that, Councillor Drew. Councillor Watton, did you want to speak to it?
No, I just wanted it to be referred
okay.
as well to
Okay. Here. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to council. Just for council's information, in receiving this piece of correspondence, I did forward it to the committee of coordinator for the School Accessibility Advisory Committee to place on their next agenda, so just for everyone's information.
Any other questions on this? All right, seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. The next item is 9.3.6, Councillor Somerville. Excuse me, are you motion to receive, or are you planning on doing something else with that?
Receive and endorse.
Receive and endorse is your motion. Seconder for that, Councillor Kett. Councillor Somerville?
I would just like to receive and endorse this because this is coming in the summertime through the federal passing in the federal laws. And I know that we're going to have some issues here in Port Perry, or in our township, with regards to the cannabis consumption, and a lot of laws of where we're going to have to, what we're going to be opening and how we're going to be opening, and the consumption lounges, and there's a lot of things that we're going to have to go through as far as the bylaws are concerned, and I would just like to endorse this, and just so that we've got it on hand, because This is going to be law with the government soon.
I just have some questions, but I'll circle around to council first. Any other questions from council? Okay, Councillor Drew?
Just wanted everyone to be aware, and I think I mentioned this in a previous regional report, that the region is looking at developing a bylaw that perhaps would be for all of the municipalities if they choose to, so that there is, everybody's on the same page. I don't know exactly where that bylaw is standing right now, but it has been brought up at council a month or so ago, so I'm sure that they're working very hard on developing the bylaw.
Any other questions from council? Councillor Watton?
I would just comment that if we do anything, I would refer it to staff for review, especially when it comes to if we're going to endorse lounges and so on as described through this. Before I'd want to endorse any of that, I would like to have some feedback from staff on it.
Mr. Hoare?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just so council are aware that staff have already started to do research into this area. So yes, this is very timely. This correspondence I also forwarded to the planning staff that are working on the analysis right now. So what we're doing is we're looking at the proposed legislation, and Councillor Drew has mentioned we're talking to the region about the bylaw they're proposing for the region. And then we're also looking at what other municipalities have in mind. And we want to bring forward, through the committee structure, probably economic development, tourism structure, some of the ideas and comments we have for putting a regulation in place. Right now, Scugog is very lightly regulated in this area. And in the rural area, it's governed as any other farm crop, and there are no regulations really speaking to the processing or manufacturing of the byproducts. So it's an area that we do need to look at, and we are looking at currently.
And that's really what my comment was going to be, is there's references to, lounges and Oshawa's positions on certain items where I'm unsure of actually where I would want to be supporting or not supporting on it without having enough detailed background on it, because this was a report that was to their city council, and I know that from what the CAO has just referenced too, there's been comments about growing and the medical uses now and the growing operations and our zoning bylaws, so there's a lot being looked at, and as we know what's coming down the pipe on the recreational legalization, I do know that Oshawa and a few of the other lakeshore communities were identified as retail locations, so they are trying to catch up, match their framework to the sale of the goods and the use of it. So I know the region has been tackling quite a bit of it, but it is a big task, and it's an unknown area, and we know it's going to be a work in progress, that we're not going to get everything right when it becomes legal, and that there's going to be a lot of organic changes that are going to happen to the rules. But I just think, I agree with Councillor Watton that it might be a little bit premature to endorse this because it involves so many possible stances that I'm unclear of. So that's my comment on it. So I don't know if Councillor Kett and Councillor Somerville want to amend it just to refer to staff, receive and refer to staff, or a report back. Refer to staff. Okay. Any other questions from council on that? So the motion is refer to staff. All right. All those in favor? Carried. That brings us to the end of the consent agenda. We now have on the agenda, next up is item 11, notice of motion, moved by Councillor Kett, seconded by Councillor Back, about the motion that was given notice. Councillor Kett, did you want to speak to your motion?
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to state that, I think in the eyes of our constituents and to show transparency, that we just obtain the expense statements of all council staff, township credit cards, expense claims, including but not limited to all mileage, meals, lodging, incidentals, including all expenses, and cash in lieu of payments made by the township or the region for 2016 and 17, and report back to council. Now, this is not an audited statement, it's just to come up with the expenses so we can review them and let the rest of Scugog be satisfied that we've done our due diligence.
All right, Mr. O'Rourke?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just with respect to that matter, I wanted to make council aware that during the review that council directed staff to undertake of Councillor Kett's expenses, I instructed the treasurer and the manager of finance to examine council and senior staff expenses in a sufficient manner to indicate whether there are any problems that I should be aware of as the CAO. Staff have reported through that review that they did not find any problem, other than a few community event mileage claims that were made by council. Those claims, we're still trying to determine overall what the definition of community event is. And I do feel that should council wish to proceed with an audit of some type, it should be by a third party and not be done by staff. In saying this, the treasurer and manager of finance are here. They're here for the budget proceedings today. And if you'd like to direct any questions to them with respect to that review, I know that they'd be willing to answer any questions council have.
Councillor Guido, you had your hand up?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a few clarifying questions. Councillor Kett, when you reviewed your notice of motion, you advised so that we could review the expense, or so that council can review the expense statement. Is that you're looking for each individual council member to take what is provided from the finance department and review the expense claims?
Basically, all I wanted was what the CAO has stated to be shown to council. It could be in a closed meeting, it could be in a meeting just general, to have those statements available for everybody on council. If council wishes to do it separately, then by all means, but I want them available to anybody on council.
And what is it you're looking for? What is the that you're looking for?
The expenses of all council staff.
So if I was to submit a expense request, you're looking for my copy of my expense that I put mileage or whatever I would write, that's what you're looking for?
No, I'm just looking for the ledger that states what it is.
So my question now goes to the finance department, the ledger or whatever it is that Councillor Kett was referring to. Is this something that you have readily available, that should someone want to look at it, or is this something that will take time to produce?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we do have a list of the expenses. Depending, we do have limited character issues with our accounting system, so I'm not sure what kind of detail would be provided on all of those, but there is line item detail available.
Okay.
Okay, my basic point is that what they did, what was done for council that we received a couple of weeks ago was line items. Is that not what is there for staff as well?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, when I have to compile that report, I have to actually go get all the expense claims from the submissions from the counselors to determine, because what comes through on my system will say AMO conference expenses, and then I have to go pull the detail to determine whether it was a hotel, parking, whatever it happens to be, to get the full detail. So I'm not sure that the listing from the system is going to give you what you need to complete whatever review you're trying to complete.
I'm sure that I would be happy with what the CAO looked at, because he didn't find any discrepancies, so I'd be happy with that.
I just want to be clear, if I could, Mr. Mayor, that I instructed the treasurer and manager of finance to do that review. I did not undertake that review, and I was briefed with them with respect to their findings, which I've reported on.
If I may continue with my questions, Mr. Mayor? Thank you. So I am not in favor of supporting any motion that's going to cost the municipality any type of financial burden in order to do this. So I just wanted to make that clear. As far as the cash in lieu of payments made by the township and region, do we have any jurisdiction to request the region to provide information to us, or does that have to be something separately requested to the region?
I don't know if you want to add it.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I don't think that we have any jurisdiction over the region. It would have to be a separate request to them.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Katz?
Okay, just to rebut.
Response to it, yeah?
Yeah. Mr. Mayor, the expenses from the region are already broken out. So the reason I'm saying this is because when the expenses will go into the paper, they don't give the full breakdown of all the expenses. The region has already published their statement of the expenses for everybody. Like my mileage is on the regional expense account. So, I mean, that's already been given to us. It's not that we need jurisdiction.
But I'm a little unclear. I mean, that's what we already have in our agenda here, is our breakdown of our annual required mileage and expenses that are already listed. So you have that information.
I didn't have that information when I made this.
Okay, but it's annually, though. It's an annual requirement.
I realize that now.
Yeah. Okay, so Councillor Drew is next up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, I was going to make that point on page 48, and that is that twice a year that you, just once a year, that's made public every year? And I didn't see anything on page 48 that raised any red flags in my mind. I'm just wondering, is staff investigated the number of staff hours required to do this audit, or prepare for a third party to do this audit?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we've not identified how much time it would take,
roughly.
Well, we can say that if you did all that.
You just,
probably a couple of weeks.
Okay, thank you. If we go to a third party, has staff investigated how much that would cost?
Anywhere in the range, through you, Mr. Mayor, in the range of $50,000 to $85,000. Based on line item detail.
As a result of a particular member's mileage expenses claims that was flagged for irregularities by staff, just go over again what measures were put in place, what policies were put in place so that this didn't happen again, and the dates.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So a new mileage policy was put in place, I believe it was March of last year. There are several policies that we've looked at to try and narrow the gap that existed. So mileage, corporate credit card policy, conferences committee, those, yeah, I think the first conferences, conventions, and seminars came later. I think our manager of HR did that, I think, in May. The credit card and the mileage were done last March.
Thank you. So enough of, a number of policies have been put in place to tighten up what we already had, just so that it was a lot clearer. Okay. And actually the CAO already alluded to this, in your investigations, would you reiterate, did you see any red flags in any expenses of anybody staff, council, committees? Did you see any red flags in your review over the past year or so?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we did not. We just, as Mr. Laura had indicated, there is some ambiguity around community events that we'd like further clarified, that's all.
So would I.
Yes.
Yeah. So, as I see it, our choices are pay a third party to do the investigation at a cost of $85,000 or so, and where would that money come from, if I may, through you, Mr. Mayor?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it would just have to we would have to offset it with other items through the budget.
Okay, that's roughly 0.7% on the levy. Yeah. Or we could do an internal investigation over and above what's already been done and that would take approximately 2 weeks. If that is the case, we would need to determine what is coming off the table as far as your work plans. We've already seen other investigations, the result of which we had to delay our budget because of workload on behalf of the finance staff. This term, a considerable amount of staff time has been taken up with investigations, robbing staff time, which would be better spent on their work plans and prescribed by our strategic plan and our township budget. An indication of the workload would be the delay of the budget to accommodate investigations. And a considerable amount of tax dollars has been sent on legal and other professionals for investigations or advice. With the absence of any evidence of abuse by anyone or any committee, I question the need to spend any more time and certainly any more dollars on unnecessary investigations. So I will not support the motion. Thank you.
Councillor Back?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As a timely, note to this, in the Toronto Star last Wednesday, February 28th, there was an article with regards to Vaughan, and this was a member of the public had requested, he had requested very similar to this, expenses, and Vaughan has the P card, which I don't know if that makes it easier or not for the staff to compile a list, but they provided the gentleman, Richard Lorello, with a list of every purchasing card, the P card, expense made by hundreds of City of Vaughan staff members between April 2015 and April 2017, so a 2-year. So now I would assume that that was a freedom of information, and that is not from a duly elected official, but from just a resident wanting to see, and was provided such information. And so I have to question the need to want to have a third party involved and to give shock value of $80,000 so that we would not pursue this. As they say, there's more than one way to skin a cat. If we can't, as a council, decide, then obviously it could be up to a taxpayer to request this as well, and I would assume anything that's expenses with tax dollars should be shown. I'm not stating that I think that there's any concern with expenses of staff, but I think that the fact that we, as staff, had to do this audit with request from a taxpayer, and that was not initiated by council, so the delay in the budget was because of a taxpayer requesting such expense list of Councillor Kett. I don't see the issue with regards to even a 2017 year. Print them off. Let us take a look. It doesn't need a third party. It doesn't need an audit. I had a retired accountant speak to me when this first came out, when I had initially requested it, and he was awestruck and sort of ridiculed the fact that the dollar amount came to us. And he said, "You're asking for a review.
You're asking for a review of, here's the list of expenses, and here is the policy. It wouldn't cost more than $5,000. So with regards to the $75,000, $80,000, $5,000, to me it's irrelevant. Councillor Kett has requested it, and I think that we should have the list compiled, or have a report just like the council did. This is Director so-and-so, and this is their yearly expenses with regards to meals, conferences, mileage, and I don't really think that that requires a third party. I don't think it requires much time. May I remind council that the BIA now, doing their own books, has alleviated a lot of time from my finance department on numerous staff members, from accounts payable to our actual finance department logging in. So the time could be there, and I would second Councillor Kett's request that we get a report, because I was told when I asked this that I would see it in the budget under the different offices, and it's a helicopter view, and I'd like to see a little more meat and potatoes. So I don't see the problem with having it just like ours. Here's the mileage, here's the meals, here's the conferences, personal development or whatnot, compiled. Ask for a year, 2017.
Councillor Watt?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First off, do we have P-cards?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no, we don't.
Okay, so if we don't have P-cards, and if we did, based on Councillor Back's comments, it would shorten the time to compile, but since we don't, the time to compile is still extreme. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we have corporate visas. It's not, and as I mentioned, the way that the information is put into the system, it just says visa. It doesn't give any details as to what was charged for the visa. It could have been a membership, could be an MOE, Ministry of Environment application for something. It just says visa, so it's not really going to provide that much detail.
Okay, so and further to that, Councillor Back, you referred to a private citizen asking for documentation with respect to expenses for Councillor Kett, and if I recall correctly, at that time, rightly or wrongly, and whatever, I seem to recall that the individual said it took numerous weeks to go through all those expenses that were compiled from a Freedom of Information ask. And frankly, I'm not sure what we hope to achieve through this process. We have a report before us on the councillors' expenses, and it's very obvious, what was spent where, and I don't know that I need to see that from staff personally. And I just think it's going to be very time-consuming. And I don't know about how much it will cost, but I won't be supporting it either.
First-time speakers on this. Councillor Somerville, you're I think the only one that hasn't spoken.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
You don't have to. I'd be happy to sum it up.
I think I don't want to see a lot of expense going into, for the residents to have to pay for something. I would like to see perhaps this all changing, though, so that this doesn't happen in the future. Perhaps management, senior management, in particular, Diane's department, could maybe make things a little different so that each year now, from here on in, we do get a report, or we do get something that says, and I know you can do it, but I don't want you to have to go back, because I know that's a lot of work going back and digging into the past, and I don't want a third party coming in, because that's just too expensive. And I don't want you guys to waste your time, because you've got a lot more things to do. But from this point on, I would like to see things changed, and perhaps you could make it different. You could make it so that the visas do itemize things a little different, that each one of the, you can't? Well, each one of the senior managements even, each department, could you make it so that it looks, that each one has some kind of a itemized statement that we can look back into it so that we can see? Would that be possible? Then questions would be answered.
If I could, Mr. Mayor, just on that thought, Councillor Somerville, we attempted in the this year's budget to try to break out the expenses further, and we did break that into a number of categories. I know that Councillor Back thought it was a little higher than she wanted, but the whole budget process has been an evolution. As you know, we've revamped the budget from the bottom up, and the fruits of that are shown in this year's budget and the savings that we've been able to gain. Hopefully we'll talk about that further when we get into the budget deliberations. But we can look, our intention actually is to evolve that further and break those down further. And if council would like to see further breakdown in specific areas, like mileage or conference and education expenses, I mean, we can do that. It's just, like I say, an evolution, and you have to correct me, Madam Treasurer, but how many categories did we break the budget down this year that different from last year?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think there are 13 different categories. 13
different categories in each?
In the expenses, yes.
Yes, in the expense area of each of the departmental budgets, which is 13 areas we've broke down at a more detailed level than the year before. And as I say, we're evolving this, and we can continue to build on that.
I think I would like to see that more than anything, so that it does answer a lot of questions in the future for the next council. I mean, this may be brought up again next year. Some of us will be here, but some of us may not be here. And I think I'd like to see things evolving and continuously evolving to make it so that we can just pick up the paper and take a note as to how much senior management is spending and departments are spending.
And if I could, Mr. Mayor, just on that point, yes, and if council is approving the budget, and the budget is for these expenditures, then, you know, you need to have confidence that those expenditures are being spent in accordance with the policies and procedures that were approved by council, that staff implement, such as the mileage policy, credit card policy, conference and seminar policy. And shortly after our treasurer's arrival, I think it was within the first 3 months, she turned her mind to strengthening some of those policies. And she mentioned some of the policies that have been strengthened, in addition to overhauling the complete budget process. So I just want council to know that it's a systematic approach that senior management have to looking at the policies that are in place and making sure that they're reviewed, updated, and strengthened to the best way possible. Many policies have not evolved here for many years, but we are going through them, and we are trying our very best to make sure that they're revamped so they do provide that level of accountability that's needed.
Director of Finance?
Just wanted to add, through the Mayor, that we will be putting forward operating results as well. So for the year end, we'll have their audited statements, but we will be bringing forward to council a couple of times a year the status of the operating results, which will show the details of similar to the budget. So this past year, we implemented a new capital and operating budget software, and I'm still working on some of the reporting out of it. So in order to, there's still some work to be done. We haven't fully implemented everything, but we're still working on the reports and things, but I can take that into consideration.
Councillor Tet?
Thank you, Mayor. And I applaud the CAO for taking the initiative to do that. And I would, as Councillor Back said, I would be happy with 2017 and just the information that the decision was made on. So I realize you haven't seen it, but I'd be happy to see the information that the decision of, because it's readily available, so I'd be happy with that.
Councillor Back?
Thank you, through the mayor, and I concur with Councillor Somerville and Councillor Cutt to this information. That would, I think, appease curious minds, I guess, so to speak. With regards to our CAO and Director of Finance, you know, I really do appreciate you shoring up some sort of lax policies or non-existing policies that the township has had. I know that our CAO was diligent in that last year, and when he first came in 2016, to see that there were a lot of loose ends that really needed to be shored up. I appreciate that, and I think it's just the times, and it's not specific to this municipality. I just think it's the times that people want to see, and you know, you hear it all the time, transparency and open, you know, be open and transparent, and so that is good. Now, with regards to departmental expenses, when we see that, when we have food provided, if we do go over a supper time frame, does that go to the clerk's department? Whose expense is that? And then is it highlighted as council? Just because I wouldn't want to have that there's, you know, statistically there's an outlier in a certain area that it looks like the clerk is going to restaurants on a daily basis. Do you know what I mean? So if we have those amounts, that if there is an outlier, that it is then highlighted and saying under the clerk's department provides for meetings of committees or whatnot, so that, you know, one particular director could not be, you know, pointed out as heavy-handed with food or such, because that is what happened with Vaughan, where it showed a lot of money for food and whatnot, and maybe it wasn't noted that this food from this department was actually for council meetings or for committee meetings, and you wouldn't want to have that unduly embarrass any of the staff members.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I actually like to move on that a little bit. Without doing analysis on expenditures, that's exactly what would happen, that there could be outliers, and without being informed and doing the analytics, it may appear that certain things are being, you know, somebody's abusing it when in light they're not. So I do caution on just giving line details, because it doesn't give the full picture. And in answer to your question, it does get charged to the clerk's budget. That's where we've allocated it. But he watches his budgets very carefully, so.
Councillor Kent?
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to make it perfectly clear. I'm not here to have any expenses or anything, and like I said, I'd be happy to just have 2017 with what has been agreed with on our treasurer and our CFO, or both.
Okay. All right, so, but that's not, to me, what I read from your motion that you put forward as notice of motion here. To me, I interpret that as work involved by the finance department to prepare those reports and make sure there's enough information that it's not misleading. And I'm all for transparency. We have our council remuneration here. We are a public body. Everything is open and fair as long as it's not deemed confidential. We have to abide by any FOIs that are requested, but there's a system in place for that. If it takes a considerable amount of time, then there's a process for that, and we can manage that. But by us, in my opinion, if I was to support your motion, to me, that's giving a lot of direction to staff to provide this information. by themselves, and if they were to have it interpreted, then I would want a third party to be doing it, because I think it's really unfair for them to prepare information on themselves, and that's where the costs come into play. So I would be wanting third party involved, but I don't want the expense to be incurred. So I don't have any concerns. I trust our staff completely. We have excellent staff. There have been no red flags that have been raised. There's been reviews on that. If there were issues, then we would receive that. We have professionals. They have designations there in the finance department. They have a fiduciary responsibility for ethics they have to abide by. I am completely comfortable with the reporting, the expenses, and the policies that are being adhered to. So I don't support the motion the way it's written. I do think there's been a lot of information brought forward here, Councillor Somerville, and just the discussion we're having here about enhancing reports coming forward in the future so that there can be some of these maybe additional reporting on items that was already referenced, education, etc. So I think they're already reported on, they just may not be spread out, and to go back, that involves time when we already are in the process for year ends and you know, this budget is finalized, but it doesn't take long before we're into the new budget period. So I support there being an enhancement to the communication as long as we're going forward with that one, and already the CAO has said yes, it's an evolving organic exercise. We already know from the budget that we have now, there's a lot more information in here that we can help make our decisions, and that's what it's all about, is a transparency, so we can make decisions on it. So that's how I'd like to sum it up, is that I don't support this motion, but I do support the direction that staff is agreeing to enhance it. It's not that we're trying to identify any concerns, it's just to make sure that if there's concerns out in the public that are saying that we're hiding things or we don't want expenses to be out there, I fully support it being completely transparent. I just don't support us incurring extra time, that we have such a skeleton crew and limited staff time to already do the tasks ahead of them, and then to add more stuff onto them. It's not fair, and I also don't support expending or taking any more additional public taxpayers' money, having a third party involved in reporting on something or commenting or preparing something that we don't have any concerns with. It's the will of this council. If there was a concern, then they would have to follow the majority of this council, which is what we're here for.
And my point, Mr. Mayor, is the fact that we're not, I'm not asking for any extra funds to be paid. I just said, it says strictly obtain expense statements. Obtain. Now they're already there. We already know they're there. So let's see them. That's all. There's nothing. There's absolutely no cost.
Councillor
It's
Carra,
push print.
I'm not going to debate this with you. It's already been discussed. There is extra time. It's not what you're thinking. There's already something that's there that is ready to just hand it over. There is staff involvement with this. That is required. Now, if there's a further discussion that you would like to have to see on how precursory, like the analysis was done on it, and how that's a conversation that can be had without involving a lot of staff time or expenses on the information that is there. Your motion does not ask for that, and I don't want to to continue talking about something in your interpretation and what this motion is saying. I would say that if you have something simplistic that's not going to be involving a great deal of time when we're retroactive, looking in the past, that's completely different than what this motion is asking for. It's asking for, not limited to, and it goes through the great detail, and the last thing we want to is a report that goes out that doesn't identify the groups. And I know this from looking at, you can have a category where everything gets dumped into, and then it's easily interpreted as that being an expense, when really, truly, there's subcategories within that, but the accounting software hasn't been set up with that, because when it was going into the system, it's all it needs to match up is to the budget line item. So, I just don't support the motion the way that it's written. But I think we've had excellent conversation going forward. There'll be enhanced communication. Councillor Watton? Okay. All right, so having said that, I'll put the motion to to a vote. Councillor Ket's motion is that staff obtain the expense statements of all council staff and the township's credit card expenses, expense claims including but not limited to all mileage, meals, lodging, incidentals, including all expenses and cash in lieu of payments made by the township and region for 2016 and 2017, reported back by council by April 30th. All those in favor? Okay, lost. All right, before we adjourn the meeting, I just want to say that we are going into a 4 o'clock, before we get to the new business, I do want to remind everybody, since I've talked about that, we do have a 4 o'clock budget meeting that will be starting again once we're done the new business portion, and that we have it listed, advertised at that 4 o'clock time. That's why we won't be continuing right after this meeting is closed. So on the agenda, we have new business. Councillor Drew?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a couple of questions for the clerk. The previous code of conduct was apparently not clear with respect to members of council issuing media or press releases. The current code of conduct for members of council states in section 38, quote, "Official information related to decisions and resolutions of council and its boards and committees shall be communicated to the public and the media in an official capacity by the mayor or designated staff member or through a press release issued by the manager of communications and strategic initiatives or their designate. Members shall not issue their own press release prior to the official press release issued by the township." My question, Mr. Clerk, is do you feel that the section is now clear in this respect?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through to council. In comparison to the previous section of the previous code of conduct that spoke about communications and media relations, I believe that this section is clearer than that section of the previous code of conduct for members of council, yes.
Thank you. Another question. Can you please inform us, Mr. Clerk, of the MFIPPA, Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy legislation, and/or the Canadian anti-spam legislation regarding the unauthorized use of private email addresses?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to council. Within the Municipal Freedom of Information Protection and Privacy Act, I don't have the section in front of me, however, it does state that personal information shall only be used for the purpose in which it was received, so it can't be used for any other purpose other than for a consistent purpose in terms of how it was received. So, for example, if personal information was received on an application form, that personal information could be used to approve or deny that application form, but not for other purposes. That's within the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. I'm not by any means an expert on the Canada anti-spam legislation. However, in having some questions with regards to this during the last week, there is websites in regards to the Canada anti-spam legislation, and if anyone has any issues with that and consider themselves to have received spam, for instance, there are reporting mechanisms for that, and I only know that just by looking at their website. There is a test to be done as to whether to determine whether you have got spam or not, and if you meet that test, obviously it's within anybody's right to submit a report to the through that website to the Canada anti-spam legislation.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Any other comments, Councillor Kett? Because I am going to...
Thank you. I think I'll direct a question to the clerk. I did send out a press release last week, or 2 weeks ago, and it was not a decision of council, so I'd like the clerk to comment on that, please. If he thinks it's a violation of our code of conduct when it wasn't a decision of council.
Mr. Mayor, maybe I should answer that on behalf of the clerk. I don't think it's really up to staff or the clerk to give an interpretation of whether a clause in the council code of conduct is a violation or not. That's the duty of the Integrity Commissioner.
But let me chime in here. It's also the duty of the mayor to make sure that we are adhering to the code of conduct and to call anything out. And as you had already noted that you did send out a press release, and then I asked for you to retract that and apologize for that, because it was a press release, in my opinion, that violated the Code of Conduct, because Section 38, as Councillor Drew has already read out, says that members shall not issue their own press release prior to the official press release issued by the township. So that doesn't mean if we haven't talked about it, you're going to go and issue a bunch of press releases about anything that we haven't talked about, because that defeats the whole purpose of having this in there. Now, an integrity commissioner's job and role would be to continue on that. That's the, something that I have made a stance on, that I believe that you were in violation of our Code of Conduct. You did send out an email rescinding that press release, maybe not the apology that I wanted to go along with it, but I do stand by that press release caused a great deal of confusion, because if it wasn't confusing, I wouldn't have received a flood of emails from people wanting to know, A, where you got their emails from that they thought were private and confidential, and they were wondering if there was any system breach that we had here, which our IT manager said no, there wasn't, and that everything was okay here. We don't know where you got your email address database from. Two is the reference to the CASL, the Canadian Anti-Spam legislation, which is very firm federal law about anti-spam, and I'd cautioned you on that, on saying about making sure you're on side with the federal government, because that's completely out of our jurisdiction with the Code of Conduct, but not having certain things on any sort of communication you send out without the permission of sending an email. And the third thing is the fact that the items that you talked about in there, you can have your own opinion on, but when it's communicated in a way that looks like it's come from this council, interpreted that way, even if that wasn't your intent, and it's on items that to me are misleading and are not the whole picture of it, then it makes us look bad as a town council, because it looks like we are the ones supporting it, and we don't have all the information that you have when you're putting forward your own communication. So I really took offense, just like many of the recipients of it, the way that you had sent out that press release, and I would expect you to publicly, in this public forum now, is to reiterate your rescinding of that email and an apology, because many of those emails that you would have sent out would have been blocked by spam the second time around, or may not have been received, and I've had many emails requesting for you to retract that and to apologize in the public forum. And I think it is in your best interest, and I want you to publicly also to apologize for them.
Well, Mr. Mayor, as was on the email that was sent out, it's my belief that I'm not in breach of our Code of Conduct. It was not a decision of council, and it says very specifically that that's what it is. I did not do it on my email address from the township. I did not mention that at any time that it was to do with the township. I left my own phone number, nothing from the township, and my name. Okay. So for anyone to be confused, and especially yourself, Mr. Mayor, that you were confused that it was coming from the township, I apologize to you and to anybody else that felt that that was coming from the township. I sincerely do apologize that when somebody reading that actually felt that it was from the township.
Well,
and I explained that to you, and I explained that on my rescinding.
But when you sign it as Councillor Kett...
I didn't sign it as Councillor Kett. I put Don Kett...
Councillor for Scugog.
No, I did not.
well, on your emails that you have sent out, you have an auto signature that is going out to people with that on there, and I have copies of correspondence from you that has Councillor Kett and also Director of KRCA.
That was sent from my own email? Well, that wasn't from me.
And it says Don Kett, Google Council, Director of Kawartha Region Conservation, and 4165, your number, and it's got a table of all these numbers along with this, the press release, and it says Google Councilor and KRC Director right at the first line of your press release. So you're
Well-
already leading into the press release that I'm a Google Councilor and I'm a Director of KRCA,
Yeah.
and here's the press release.
But if I was a policeman, can I not say that I'm a policeman?
Not in a public representation like that, and that's the whole point, and that's why I said, is you need to be careful and clarify that. Nobody's trying to muzzle you from your opinions or to say something that you believe in, because that's what you're here for. You're here to represent, but you have to do it in the right capacity, in the right medium, and that's why I wanted you to clarify it. I wasn't talking about, the content specifically. I was saying your format that you had sent it out is, in my opinion, clearly offside to that, is interpreted as a press release from Township, even if you have reasons. And I know that there's another letter to the editor that's going in the paper that talks about that the retraction from you was wrong in saying that, but I disagree. I believe with all the people that I receive correspondence from is that why would you want to send something out that could be even somewhat be misinterpreted from that with the press release on there, and that was my concern right from the beginning. So, I didn't want to interrupt your apology that was happening there, but I would give you the opportunity to finish what you were saying there, so that your apology is in the public forum, and that you can further clarify what your intent was on that one, and anybody who did not receive the response from it, that you apologize for using their emails, because that's the concerns that were there, was how did you get these emails, and it was pointing the finger at the township.
And I understand, and I explained that to you, and it was from people that had been playing games on the internet or so. I don't really know how they get out there.
But it came from you signed it, so
No,
that's
I
you're responsible
I understand,
for it.
we've gone through that, Mr. Mayor, and to the people that, didn't, solicit the email, I apologize to them.
Okay.
And I know where a lot of these are coming from, but the fact is, if it wasn't solicited, then I apologize to those people. But there was a great number of people that were thankful for it, and the people that, if the people that complained adds up to less than 100, then it's less than 0.01% of the people that got the email.
And you know what, that whole concern about that it's not the whole picture, the press release that you do is not vetted from staff, it's not been supported by council, this is an opinion from you, and it's something that, if you like, I would have the Commissioner of Finance from the region come up and explain how it's different. We've had that a couple years ago, I understand it, that to me is I understand all this, and the way I read your press release, it's misleading, because you can't take a property that is of value and compare them apples to apples, and I don't want to get into the content of the press release you had. It's just that there are serious implications of anti-spam laws, and it's not a matter of obtaining somebody's email address that's on public domain. It's you have to have the permission in order to even send them something. It's very strict laws in Canada, and I know this from the private sector, and that's what I was warning you about, is you'd be best to retract that and apologize.
I just apologize to people, and to anybody that didn't want it, I will retract it. So, you know that I've sent another one out,
Okay.
stating exactly what it is. So, I mean...
Well, and I hope going forward that you don't send anything that can be misled as a press release from this there, and I told you in my first email on how I felt was offside, and that we have a manager of communications here that has offered, we've already said, could help with any communications that, to make sure that they're not offside with our official communications process, so we have the resource there, so I would like it to if you were going to do any sort of items that are, in your opinion, that they're not going to cause problems like this in going forward, and especially as we get closer to an election time period. I don't want to be spending a lot of our time distracting from the great, wonderful things that this council has done, the staff has done, the municipality, and to me, that's what it's doing, is it's causing a lot of time and energy being spent on something. Even if that wasn't your intent, it is draining of resources, and we could be spending that time on much better things. So, having said that, is there any further new business that council would like to talk about? Seeing none, motion to adjourn, moved by Councillor Guido, second by Councillor Watton. All those in favor? Carried. 4 o'clock is our next meeting.